Oops. Okay.
Hello.
Can you hear and see me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Getting things started today. Everything has been a little bit crazy, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to move a couple things around, and I'm going to send out an email. I meant to send it out yesterday, or not yesterday, last week, and I forgot to. We're going to work with images, but we need to have some sample images, so I'll send an email about what type of images you kind of need to have ready and stuff, and if you don't have anything, I can maybe create a sample and stuff so I can see it. I can show you guys. But I want to go ahead and work on list today. And we will look at list. And we have 3 different types of lists. We'll probably do 2 today and 1 on Thursday. That's the current plan. If we get really ahead of schedule, we might do all 3 today and start images on Thursday. But I think we'll do the 3rd list type on Thursday. It's just a little bit more. I don't want to say it's more complex. It's just there's a little bit more to it. It's not difficult. It's just there's a little bit more to it. So let's look at what we can do with some list. And I need to come over here. I have my HTML file, and we've looked at this before. If I launch this in Chrome, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? Hold on. Okay, so this is an example that we had created before. It's got all about HTML5 and just some information here. I don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we're going to be just updating this just so we can kind of see what's going on with it and how we're going to use list by default. Now, I've got, just as an FYI, you should have access to the online book that I wrote for this, so you can go through it. So we're just going to kind of pull stuff from here. Remember, this has a little bit more information than the notes online, but this will be also posted in notes. A little bit more succinct methodology. So if you just need like a quick look, you can go look at the notes. If you need a more in-depth look, you can look at the book. So we'll do that. There's a couple things you need to know about list just in general, and these are things that we've kind of talked about and built on from before. So there are 3 basic types of list. The 2 that we're going to look at today are the ordered and the unordered list. We'll talk about them a little bit more specifically what that means later on. There's also a 3rd type, which is a definition list. That one doesn't get used as much just because, in all honesty, a lot of your WYSIWYG editors, things like your Dreamweavers and things like that, they just didn't support it, and that's because of how it was. Lists were real easy. The unordered and the ordered lists were real easy, but the definition list was a little bit more challenging for them to do, so they didn't do it too much. But I'll show you what those are like, like I said, hopefully on Thursday. In all cases, though, our lists are what we refer to as the block level elements. Remember, those are the elements that take up the full width of our screen. Okay, so every bit of information that we can take, we can use. So let's look at the just something simple like an unordered list. So an unordered list is going to be in its own tag. We're not going to have it inside of a paragraph tag or anything like that. And I'm going to start for an unordered list with a UL tag, and then I'll have a closing UL tag like you see here. Okay, this just lets me know I have that the items that are inside of these 2 tags are going to be unordered. And unordered is going to be things that don't have to be followed in a specific order typically. So if I'm thinking about baking a cake, like the other day I baked brownies. I baked brownies with my son for my other son's birthday. So they had a list of ingredients. I didn't need to get the ingredients out of the cupboard in any particular order. I just had to make sure that all of my ingredients were there. Okay, makes sense, right? Now, when I was baking them and mixing the items, those things had to be done in order. I had to preheat the oven, then I had to mix my eggs and get my brownie mix in, and then I had to, beat them until they were all, thoroughly mixed, and then, I had to go step by step by step by step. And those I had to do in order. I couldn't, put my brownie mix in the oven and then add my eggs to it. Okay, so the order mattered. So the unordered list, UL for unordered list, these steps don't have to be in a specific order. If I'm creating a packing list when I'm going to go travel for some reason, my packing list is going to be an unordered list. It doesn't matter what items I take in what order, as long as I take all of them. Now, the individual items in my list that are going to be going with me, or I'm going to be adding to my recipe or whatever, those are what we call list items. And so it's going to be an LI. And I can do things like 1 egg, and I'll have a closing list item tag. Oops. I have a list item tag, and I'm going to have 1/3 of a cup of vegetable oil. Oil. And technically, I don't have to have my closing list item tag. So if I did this, and then I did excuse me, because by default I can't have list items as a child of another list item. It knows, that there's supposed to be a closing list item here, and it's going to be totally okay with this. So if I come over here and I reload this, here's all my items. You'll notice I had little dots in front of them. Okay, that's how we know it is a unordered list. Okay. I can have them, like I said, the closing and the unclosing mixed in, no problem. Now, what happens is I may not want to have just those little dots. So I can style the list and the list items however I want. I got a lot of options I can do. So I'm going to go in and create a rule that's going to affect my list style type. I'm going to show you how we go about that process. So if I say I want my unordered list style type, and by default, I'm a disk. Okay, that solid little circle is a disk. But I can say, hey, you know what? I want a circle. You notice it makes a circle. Now, some browsers, and more technically, this should be UL space LI, because this is applied to the list item. But most browsers are smart enough to be able to figure this out. So if you remember, we talked about early on, we said browsers have to be smart enough to be able to kind of figure out and imagine what you actually mean. So this should actually be UL LI, because it's going on the list item itself. And if I save that and reload it, you notice it still shows. So this is actually correct. Before, it was just being kind of smart for us. Like I said, I can put a square there. I can do none. It's kind of up to you. One cool thing I saw that someone did is they had a class for items that were checked, like when you did something. And so let me show you what that will look like real quick. They said ULLI dot checked. Instead of circle, they did that as a disk. And they come over here and say class equals checked. And I believe, oops, here we go. I believe this was like a to-do item list. So open circles were things that weren't done yet. Closed circles were ones that were checked off and done. So you can kind of do little things like this. And the way we did it, if you just noticed, was that I added a class to this called checked. And then in my CSS, I said ULLI.checked. So if we have a list item in an unordered list that's checked, now we're going to change its default list style. Okay. Other things I can do is I can set a background color. Now I do want to kind of caution you about this, just because it looks a little weird. So if I say background color and a green, remember if I use our RGB colors, RGB, so red, green, blue. So if I say something like 8F8, that's the equivalent of 88FF88. So that should be kind of a light green. Oops. That should be kind of a light green. And you can see how it goes in and takes care of that. But this is where we're talking about that block connotation, where you see all this empty space off here to the side. We can't just put another set of elements there, not without doing some CSS work. And I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But that just kind of gives you the idea of what you're looking at, okay? If I put a border around them, it's going to go the full length, so I got to be careful with that. I also want to be sometimes careful how much space I give, because notice there's not a lot of space in here. If I were to adjust this, I could say something like line spacing it's 1.6 M. So notice it doesn't give us any change. I might want to come in here and do something like margin 10 pixels. This is going to be my top and bottom by 0 left and right, which helps separate things out, gives a little bit of spacing there, make things a little bit easier to read. This is a pretty common thing that people are going to do if I don't want stuff really compacted and grouped together. By default, there's not a lot of line spacing. They want stuff kind of compacted together so you know, oh, these things all go together. The problem with that concept is if I put everything together, then it makes it so where it's all squished, it's a little bit harder to read. So I like to have things spread out just a little bit. Oh, I did line spacing originally. I meant to do line height. Line height's the other one you can do. Line height. I think I did line spacing on accident. Yeah. So if we take out the margin just as an example, so you want to do line height instead of margin, notice it gives you a little bit more spacing, but your background color all stays together. So it's just kind of which do you prefer to do? There's multiple options for something like that. Okay. Excuse me. So the other thing that you can do is and this is pretty new to CSS3, is you can specify your columns. And your columns, where's my code? Okay, so you can specify your columns. Your columns need to go on the unordered list part, because this is going to um, show how many list items will appear in a row. Because remember, you've got this big space here. And so you've got a big empty space, and a lot of people don't like that. So they say, well, if I've got a lot of items, why can't I just have multiple columns? Make sure this is saved. Wrong button. Yep. Nope. Come back here. Okay, why isn't it showing that? Hold on. Okay. Here it's showing in it, and this is one thing we do have to be cautious of. And just a reminder, each browser sometimes handles things a little bit differently. Here it is in Firefox. Chromium isn't displaying it for whatever reason. If I were to take this into Chrome itself, let's see if Chrome itself will display it. Chrome is displaying it. Chromium is not. Chromium is a more generic version of Chrome. Firefox is displaying this correctly. Okay, so it's just those little things you got to kind of keep in mind. But this is the idea of being able to kind of spread things out. Now you might go, well, wait a second, you said 3 columns, but it's only showing 2. Glad you noticed that. And that's kind of, this is like a suggestion or a hint how we want to display it. The browser said, well, wait a second, I got 4 items in 3 columns. That doesn't display right. That's going to spread things out in a kind of a weird way. If I were to add more items, just as an example, notice as I added more items, it says, oh, there's more things to show. I just didn't want to have something where there's like only 1 row and then a second row with only 1 item on it. So the browser kind of takes some liberties with this suggestion. But you can see here it put in the columns where I added, because I added some additional things. So now all 3 columns show. So this, like I said, it is a hint, but it is something that the browser will use to help fill this out. Now it doesn't look like I got this big empty space. Remember, if I looked in Chromium, because Chromium wasn't displaying it. Okay, Chromium's not displaying the column, so here's this huge empty space that could be used for something, and it's not. And so being able to split things up over columns, especially if I have like a long list, list all 50 states, or list all 44 presidents that the U.S. has had, or list every country in the EU, or however you want to provide a list of 20, 30, 40 items. If you had that as a long skinny list, that'd just be ridiculous. Be able to do something like this where you can break it out into columns just makes it a lot more succinct. It makes it easier to read in some cases. Just gives a lot more flexibility. How crazy can you kind of get with this? Most people don't go past 3. If I went to 5, notice it gives me 4 because I had 8 items. Once again, it didn't want to have just 1 row and then a partial second row. So you can do some space stuff like that. Notice it's got the room for the 5th column. It's just not using it. So, but also notice how much smaller it's getting. if I came down here and said, okay, I'm going to, just have a couple more items. 5 fits. Okay, that's okay. But if I come down here and do like 12, notice it's harder to read because I got different things on different lines and stuff like that. So you got to find that right expected number, so where I have a good number of columns that's easy to use, but not overly complex. My suggestion is typically between 2 and 5. So if I do 3, that works really easy. It's still easy to read, still easy to use, easy to update, all those types of things. But it's not an obscene single long list. If I get more than 5 columns, then everything's going to start getting jumbled together, and one line on my list item is going to be split across multiple lines, and then stuff doesn't line up, and that's harder to use, and we're trying to avoid that. So typically my recommendation is between 2 and 5. That usually works. Of course, things vary from time to time. You just got to kind of figure out what works for you there. So there's a little bit of CSS. There's a little bit of your styling for your unordered list, where you can change things. Like I said, the most common is going to be that disk type. There's actually also a way that you can specify URL. So if you had an image that you want to use, let's say you've been on a website, you've seen they use like checkbox or something like that, little check marks, or they use a little smiley face. And you're like, how do they do that? Well, you could actually use an image for your disk type and specify URL to do that. I usually don't recommend that because usually your um, little icon is going to be really, really small. And so either you make a really big icon, it takes a long time to download, and then it looks weird, and it gives some weird spacing, or it's so small you can't use it. So I usually don't recommend doing something unless you can do something small, like a little check mark or a little X or something like that. Otherwise, I just use one of the default built-in ones, if you would. Okay. Any questions on the unordered list so far?
No questions.
Okay.
All good.
Good. All right. Let's take a look at the ordered list. So, ordered list works very similar to the unordered list. Very, very similar. Let me show you what the big difference is. So if I come back here to my list, I'm going to take out some of these just because that's redundant. Overly redundant. Okay. So remember, my order list are going to be things that need to be done in a specific order. Or they were done in an order. So maybe I'm giving a list of books that I've read in the order that I read the books, because you need to read book 1 before you read book 2, because book 2 builds on book 1. Maybe I'm doing a set of instructions like I am for baking. I need those done in a certain order. So I can come in here and I specify OL for order list, and it has a matching closing tag. And then I'm going to do things like say, okay, I'm going to have a list item. Once again, LI, exact same tag that I use on my unordered list. I'm going to do something like preheat oven to 425 Fahrenheit. List item. Once again, the closing list item tag is optional. Now, a lot of people do recommend putting it there just so it's consistent, but the browser has no problem with it, and it is not technically required as part of the HTML5 spec. Add eggs to the bowl. Okay, so just the first 4 items. There's a couple more, obviously. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so here's my list items, all the items I need. Unordered lists get the little solid disk by default. We change a URL or in CSS to be the little open circle. By default, in the unordered list, we have, if you notice here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we just get a numeric list, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are things that we need. Okay. Now I can change this, just FYI, I can change this. So once again, in my CSS, I can come up here to OL for my order list items. And then if we come down here into the book, just so you can kind of see, with my order list, oh, where'd it go? Okay. I have my list style type once again. So it's the exact same CSS rule, but instead of using numerical, I can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to use, the style type lower alpha. And notice now I have A, B, C, D and lowercase. I can also do uppercase if I wanted to. So I've got a couple different options that I could use if I don't want to use a numeric data type. I can also, if I need to do steps in reverse, and I want to show them in reverse, I can type in the keyword reversed in my order list. So now it's here inside my order list. And now the elements show in the same order, but notice it's D, C, B, A instead of A, B, C, D. And if I don't have that, if I have the numeric list, it will show 4, 3, 2, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. So the items that are there are put in the same order, but the numbering is reversed. And that's kind of a really big help if I need to show, like, okay, do these steps and then do them backwards, and count down with me if you would. I don't know if you remember Letterman and his top 10 list from, now it's years ago. I remember when I was in college, he was all the hit, and he had every night he had a top 10 list of things that he was, funny things about, or something that was going on later on in the show, or something that was, kind of current topic. He'd be like number 10, then do number 9, and then number 8, and he had just kind of, it's a countdown list. So this would be a good way to do something like that very easily. Doesn't require any type of thing, just adding that extra little attribute inside the HTML tag. The other thing that you can do, which is kind of interesting with an order list, and order lists I think are a little bit more interesting because there's more things you can do. You can specify a start. And let me first show you how to do it, then I'll show you why you would do something like this. So here I just said I want to start at 10. So I have 10, 11, 12, and 13. And that's a perfect instance of where it's just starting at some arbitrary number. In this case, it's starting at 10. Let me show you why you would want to do something like that, though. So I want to add a little paragraph here, just saying, I said mix all items go until they're combined. It says, well, I want to give a little bit more information. So there's my paragraph, just describing a little bit more about that. But when I come into my OL list, I need to start now at item 5. So I'm going to use my start attribute as part of my OL tag in order to say where to start. There's going to be add contents. Pan, and then I'll do one more. So here's elements 1 through 4, mix all items until they're combined. Have a little paragraph. It's separating things out. It's breaking up. It's telling more information about what to do. Maybe it's just a little side note of information. There's a lot of things and reasons why it might be there. But then when I start up again, I don't want to say, oh, I'm starting back at the beginning. That's not right. I want to make sure I'm starting here at number 5. So I can reverse orders. I can start at a new number. I can do all types of interesting things. Let's do Lower Roman, just for fun of it. So I changed my items to be from numerals to Lower Roman. Okay, notice I have I, V, V, VI. So notice I didn't have to tell it start at V. I told it start at 5. It did the conversion in CSS to display the Roman numeral V. So the browser is really, really smart at knowing how to pick up where you left off in an item, knowing how to change and mix up items, all this type of stuff. It's a really, really smart process for being able to handle and style your individual list items, especially in an order list. I kind of find that funny because in reality, about 80% of the time, you use an unordered list. That's the most common thing that you need. Here's a list of people. These are the party attendees. They don't have to be in a specific order. It's just, hey, these are people who are coming to the party, or this is my ingredient list, or this is, my project requirements. All the project requirements are requirements. We have to meet these, but here's a list of them in an easy to see format. We don't use the OR list nearly as often, but there's actually more things that we can do with it. So that's kind of a strange but cool thing that we get out of this process. Okay, let's take a look real quick at some other things that we can do just to see. All right, so I'm going to add real quick just a little packing list as an example. We talked about that. This is going to be an unordered list. Oops. And I'm going to have things like clothes, electronics, movies. Okay. Now, the question or potential problem is, what happens if I want to break this down, be a little bit more specific? So electronics is nice, but I might need to say, well, which electronics? Because I deal with my kids, and I got teenagers, and they don't always think of everything. I grabbed my tablet, but I forgot the charging cord. And so I say, if I'm going to make a packing list for when we're going on vacation, I might want to spell that out. So I can create a list within a list, or a sublist, or if you prefer, a nested list. Any of those are legitimate ways of referring to this. I'm just going to add another unordered list tag set. You're going to create a list item. It's going to be a tablet. Laptop. Phone. Charging cords. Okay, basic stuff, right? I gotta take out this columns real quick just so it's a little bit easier to see this. Okay. So here I have my clothes, electronics. Underneath electronics, I have tablet, laptop, phone, and charging cords. And notice how it indents these automatically. And that's kind of a really cool thing for us. The other really cool thing, if I just come up here real quick, let me change my, I'm just gonna comment out this list style type. Okay. By commenting out was an important little thing I did, is you'll notice that by default, here's my disk, and my inner list is now the open circle. In fact, if I had inside of this another list, so instead of just saying, charging cords, I'm going to say, okay, I need to specify out which charging cords. So I create another unordered list. Here, list item, phone 1. Let's call this mom's phone. Tablet. And of course, laptop. Here's my third item, once again further indented, and once again my list style has changed in type. So I go from the closed circle, the disk, the circle which is open, to the closed little square. And so three different lists, 3 levels of indenting, 3 different levels of list bullet styles, if you would. Inside of CSS, I could define each one of those. So I could say ULLI, UL, ULLI, UL, ULLI. If I want to use my nesting capability for my selectors. So I could specify them very, very specifically if I wanted to. Most of the time, we just leave it by default. I would say probably 95% of the time we leave it as default. But it is there if you do want to do it. What you don't want to do is where I had originally, where I said, okay, ULLI, and so it said any list item under an unordered list is going to get the style. And so it made it harder to tell that they were a sublist. Okay, it was just kind of the process of it doing. Now, if I want to have an order list, I could say order list, just as an example. Once again, this is kind of messing with everything, so I'm just going to comment it out. This is saying any list item under the order list. Okay, so here we have list item, it's an order list, and then I have unordered list inside of them as a nested list. Notice that it picks up automatically and still does the circle for one level of indent, square for a second level of indent, that whole type of process. So it doesn't matter as far as that goes. CSS is still going to be processing the look the same. If I had multiple order list looking, so this was an order list, let's just say, and so was this. Okay, so this is doing the 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like it was before. Okay, so that's just kind of what you would expect there. Older versions of the HTML spec would do numbers and then do letters and then do lower Roman numerals. That's obviously changed. Now it's just doing numbers. But that's how you do a nested list. You just simply add inside of one of your list items, you add the either unordered or the ordered list, and it's going to automatically do the indent. It's going to move everything over that process. Okay. Styling your list items outside of things like line height, margin, stuff like that, your columns and your list styles usually doesn't occur too much. There's some challenges, and some it has to deal with is the list item inside of or outside of the area and all that type of stuff. Those are all properties you can set if you're interested in setting stuff like that, but in general, they don't need to be. So let's go over that, make sure don't. Yep, yep. Okay. Any questions on the ordered list and what we went over as far as that goes?
Oh.
Okay. So that gives us the unordered list. That gives us the order list. Like I said, the list items do not have to be closed, but the order list or the unordered list tags, they do need to be closed. That's a real important distinction. Okay. All right. So went over the unordered list, styling that, the order list, the reversed attribute, the start attribute, and nesting of lists. That's actually a decent amount. So that was actually what I really wanted to cover today. We got it covered about 45 minutes.
Nice.
So yeah, that's kind of nice. So I got a meeting in 15 minutes. But let's take that for today. Let's look at the definition list on Thursday, which is the third type. It's a little bit more in depth. It's a little bit more stuff to it. But we'll take a look at that on Thursday, and then we'll move forward with the images next week. And I'll send out the email about making sure everyone has an image ready to work with and stuff.